An enormous welcome back to part 3 of this video on the worst mistake of each 20th century UK Prime Minister. In the last video, we finished off with a brief look at Margaret Thatcher before I finished the video and left you hanging. So let's go right back into it. But first of all, please hit the subscribe button. Your support is very important to the survival of the channel, to the thrival. I don't even think thrival's a word. I'll have to check that out. It's very important. That's what I'm trying to say. Your subscription is very important and it helps us make videos. Okay, and we want to continue making videos. We're going to keep doing it, so don't unsubscribe, just subscribe. Okay. Margaret Thatcher. Margaret Thatcher was the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom between 1979 and 1990. Undoubtedly, in my opinion, she is the most polarizing Prime Minister of all, even more so than Winston Churchill, because at least Winston Churchill has the unifying factor that he won the Second World War. Margaret Thatcher seems to be the most divisive Prime Minister because there is a North and South divide in England over her premiership. Many Northerners hate her, many Southerners like her, at least, but even some Southerners don't like her, and there are some Northerners who do, but I digress, okay? So, yes, there's a North and South divide. Welsh and Scottish people especially hate her, so it's kind of interesting to see someone so divisive, but she is arguably one of the most important and indeed the most transformative. She transformed the economy from a deeply declining, weakened economy into one of the most powerful in the world again. She did that. She revolutionized, she modernized, and regardless of what we think about it, we can't deny her role in British history. But there is a large number of things which could be classed as a mistake here. And I mean large, more than anyone. She is, again, the most polarizing Prime Minister. She supported the retention of capital punishment, for example.
Do such terrible things to children. I think they've forfeited their own right to life.
And she mentioned so in 1985 during an interview with Channel 4. She destroyed Britain's manufacturing industry and her policies led to mass unemployment. We all know about the miners' strikes and Arthur Scargill and all this stuff. She was responsible for much of that. She presided over interest rates of 15%. She abolished free milk for school children. We've all heard of Maggie Thatcher, milk snatcher. We've heard of all that before. She precipitated a social housing crisis still being felt today. If you're wondering why houses are so expensive and you can't get on the housing market, well, Margaret Thatcher's policies are one of the main reasons. But most of all, her reign, and it pretty much is a reign because she was like a queen during this time. She ruled with an iron fist. She's nicknamed the Iron Lady for a reason. She is most known for her mistake of the poll tax, a controversial policy associated with her government, and it was introduced in 1989 towards the end of her premiership, and it's one of the reasons why her premiership ended. Even Tories were against the poll tax at the time. And the poll tax was met with widespread opposition and protests. Critics argued that it was regressive and disproportionately burdened lower income individuals. The fixed nature of the tax meant that poorer households had to pay a larger proportion of their income compared to wealthier households. And the opposition to the poll tax culminated in the infamous poll tax riots in March 1990. Large-scale protests took place in London and other cities, leading to clashes with the police. The unrest and the public discontent were significant factors in the decision to abandon the poll tax altogether. And in response to the widespread opposition and social unrest, Margaret Thatcher resigned as Prime Minister in November 1990, and her successor, John Major, later replaced the poll tax with the council tax in 1993. So it's the thing that destroyed her. If the poll tax didn't happen, she would have been Prime Minister for a little bit longer, I believe, although I do think it was going to happen at some point. You know, she was going to have to stand down at some point. She'd been Prime Minister for 11 years, which is very rare. And yeah, she's hated to this day by much of the working people of Britain for her poll tax, and there were celebrations when she died. She's polarizing, and this would be her biggest mistake, although there are many others we could have chosen. Next, we have John Major. John Major holds the distinction of being the Prime Minister on the day I was born, so you would think I would like him. Well, he made some big mistakes. Now, it has to be said that he has one very notable achievement, and that is the 1992 general election victory, which he was widely expected to lose. But Conservatives somehow pulled off a shocking upset victory, and you would think that this would lead to a period of greatness for John Major. Well, sadly, no. He is was largely regarded as a failed prime minister, and some of the mistakes which he made are noteworthy. However, the biggest one of all has to be the exit from the exchange rate mechanism in 1992. So the exchange rate mechanism, or the ERM, was a system designed to stabilize exchange rates between different European currencies. And in 1992, in September, the British pound came under intense pressure, and the government was forced to withdraw the pound from the ERM on what became known as Black Wednesday, which took place on September the 16th, 1992. This move resulted in a sharp devaluation of the pound, much like poor Harold Wilson who came before. And the decision to enter the ERM and the subsequent withdrawal had significant economic repercussions. While some argue that leaving the ERM ultimately allowed for greater flexibility in monetary policy and contributed to the UK's economic recovery in the late 1990s, others criticise the government's misjudgment and the economic turbulence that followed. And again, the Conservatives are seen as the party of the economy, so economic failure hits them particularly harder. It would be like the Labour prime ministers of the 70s who had to deal with the winters of discontent, for example. And in addition to economic challenges, Major's government faced internal divisions within the Conservative Party, especially after the ERM Black Wednesday disaster. It became a very fractured party, and there was constant sleaze within it, which the leader of the opposition, Tony Blair, rightfully seized upon. And it struggled with issues such as public trust, political scandal, and challenges from the opposition Labour Party, which was sort of intruding onto Conservative territory during this time and becoming something of a centrist party itself. So it's important to note that assessing a political leader's biggest mistake is subjective, but this is John Major's biggest mistake, and it ultimately cost him when he lost in 1997 to our next man, Tony Blair. Tony Blair was the Prime Minister of my early childhood, and there was lots to be positive about at the time. He had ushered in a new wave of cool Britannia. He was modernizing, he was young, he was friends with the United States, and it felt like the United Kingdom was finally back at the center stage of geopolitical discourse. But that's kind of what his biggest mistake was, because Tony Blair's undoubted biggest mistake, and it's the one he is most criticized for, is the one which ultimately led to his premature resignation alongside a fractious relationship with his good friend Gordon Brown. But I digress. One of the most controversial and widely criticized decisions associated with Tony Blair, who served as the PM between 1997 and 2007, was the involvement in the Iraq War in 2003. So, as most of us will probably know already, Blair, alongside then US President George W. Bush, committed British troops to the military intervention in Iraq, which was based on the belief that Iraq's leader, Saddam Hussein, possessed weapons of mass destruction. The decision to go to war was met with significant domestic and international opposition. The stated rationale for military action, the weapons of mass destruction, proved to be unfounded, as no such weapons were discovered in Iraq after the invasion. The conflict resulted in significant loss of life, both among military personnel and Iraqi civilians, and it had long-lasting destabilizing effects on the region, still felt to this day. The Iraq War became a highly contentious issue, and Blair faced criticism for the intelligence failures regarding the WMDs, the lack of a clear post-war strategy, and accusations of misleading the public and Parliament itself. So the decision to go to war and its aftermath had a profound impact on Blair's legacy and on public trust in political leadership. And even today, people are still calling for Tony Blair to be tried for war crimes in The Hague. People say the same about George W. Bush too, and these two were clearly both very friendly. They both wanted to invade Iraq, and regardless of where you stand on the Iraq War, and it's a polarizing issue, it's clear that this was Tony Blair's biggest mistake, and it undid much of the good that he did. And as mentioned in part 1, I said we would cover just the 20th century prime ministers, including Gordon Brown, who though wasn't elected as prime minister in the 1990s or in the 20th century at all, he was still sort of a product of the 20th century. He was sort of co-prime minister with Tony Blair anyway, so we're going to include Gordon Brown. And Gordon Brown's biggest mistake was not calling a snap general election after ascending to Downing Street in 2007. I mean, if he called a snap general election, Labour probably would have won. They were ahead in the polls at the time. Gordon Brown was very popular because he was Chancellor for 10 years and he was seen as very competent, very intelligent. And yeah, he undid that entire reputation in just 3 years with a bunch of political scandal, a bunch of gaffes, including the one where he referred to a woman as bigoted when he thought the microphone was turned off.
What did she say? Oh, everything. She just sort of bigoted woman.
Yeah, like David Cameron said, he kind of ran away from a sure victory. So this has to be Gordon Brown's biggest mistake as Prime Minister. People might say it was his handling of the economy at the time, but you can't blame the global financial crash on the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, who was really not responsible for it. So yeah, I'm going to go with not calling a general election as his biggest mistake. And that concludes the single biggest mistake of every 20th century Prime Minister plus Gordon Brown. And yeah, current Prime Ministers, again, there have been many in recent years, have all made significant mistakes too. We could include David Cameron's austerity. We can include Theresa May existing. We can include Boris Johnson, Partygate. We can make a number of criticisms against them already, but we're not going to do that. I mean, I kind of just did, but you know, I'm not going to do that here because this is not the place for a political debate, and you don't even know my political views, man, so don't judge me. Anyway, thank you for watching. Please hit the subscribe button. Don't forget you can follow us on Facebook at facebook.com/Collective Histories page, and on Instagram at instagram.com/The Collective Histories, and Twitter or X gonna give it to you at twitter.com/Collective Histo, and you can always buy me a coffee. I'm very thirsty after recording this, and that's buymeacoffee.com/Collective Histories, and then after that you should definitely watch another one of our videos. I'd be very grateful, and I would say thank you and shake your hand much like everyone else on this list did, and I'll probably call you a bigoted woman at some point, but I promise I won't because it's not going to get caught because I don't leave the mic on afterwards. Okay, anyway, have a lovely day, have a lovely weekend, and I'll be back on Monday for the next video. Will it be another series? We'll find out then. Okay, goodbye!